Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you so much for braving the weather outside. I know it's been a challenging afternoon. And I also know that this particular session, the 6 p.m. session on Thursday, there was a lot of choice. So it's really wonderful to see that you're all interested in media development and what media development can offer to mainstream journalism. Okay, so let me just do this. No, I had this problem last year. There we go. Can you see that? Eccola. Ah, there we go. Beautiful. Okay, so this is our session, learning how to learn what the international media development sector can teach newsrooms. So our panel is Deborah Kelly to my immediate left, who is head of training at Thomson Foundation, Anka Toda, who is the journalism training editor at BBC Media Action. The program did say Dragana Obradovic from Bern, but we have in her place Slobodan Georgiev.
Yeah, it's fine.
There you go. And I'm Corinne Podger. So I've worked across all of the different ways that you can learn journalism. So I have taught at universities and colleges. I've worked directly in a newsroom in the training department and on contract to newsrooms. And I work currently as a consultant to media development and media for development agencies. So what I wanted to talk about briefly in my presentation and then hand on to Deborah and Anka and Slobodan to talk about different kinds of case studies is a real overview of what media development and media for development are, and also look at some of the challenges that are facing journalism training at the moment. So in the West particularly, we have universities and colleges where you can do a formal journalism education. You can do a diploma or a bachelor, master's degree, you can do a BA. If you're a mid-career person, some institutions will offer a graduate certificate. Typically the learning is well designed and it's very measured. So you'll do content production and you'll do exams. How many of you did journalism at university, by the way? Hands up? Yeah, so you know the drill. The challenge there is often being able to reflect cutting-edge practice. It can be a challenge for academics to maintain current skills and then pass those on to the new generation of reporters. Then we have newsroom training. This is often peer-to-peer or on-the-job training or shadowing when you're going into a new role. Or it may be provided by an external service. So we have Google News Initiative. We also have external contractors, and that's something that I do. The biggest challenges in that space are a lack of time for learning. So journalists often find it very difficult to take time off to learn a new skill, a soft skill or a hard skill. And the learning is often informal, and I would say in the context of a university setting, it's not very well designed often. It's not necessarily done according to best practice. People just do the best that they can. Now we come to our sector. So we have, first of all, I want to talk about media development and training in that space. So media development is the development of the media. So it's typically journalism training in hard skills, so practical skills, and then soft skills. This can include things like verification, digital safety, training in journalism business models, perhaps special projects like cross-border collaborations, and also we see technical and managerial support for senior staff at media outlets. So it might take the form, for example, of helping to run a radio station. The challenges in this space are that funding is actually quite limited, both in terms of the amounts that are available and also the number of funders. The European Journalism Centre has published some excellent research looking at the range of funders, and if you have a look at Journalism Funders Forum, you'll see it's quite a different space to the wider development arena. And also there's been a historic focus on short workshops, so a day, couple of days, maybe 5 days. What we're seeing increasingly is a shift to include mentoring and follow-up, so support for people once they've learned a new skill, that there's someone to help them embed that skill and improve as they go along. But we do still see a lot of short workshops. Then we have media for development. So this is content creation to support development outcomes. And you know, the SDGs, for example, health, climate change. We also see this around good governance, so supporting free and fair elections, and also around things like the environment. The types of content can be very broad. This is a lot of what BBC Media Action does, so producing chat shows, talk shows, public service announcements, dramas. You're also trying to provide information to people who live in places that are called media dark. In other words, there's not even radio, it's completely off the grid. And so in those settings, you might have listening groups, for example. Someone get on a bicycle and bring you a radio program, and then they cycle back with your views. Also street theatre. And training for journalists to cover development issues. The biggest challenge there is that the target beneficiaries are communities and societies. So the direct beneficiary is not necessarily journalists. Okay, so Deborah and Anka and Slobodan will provide you with case studies around media development and media for development. I just want to get a sense of who in the room is a journalist or working as a newsroom trainer. We have a few people, excellent. So as a practitioner across all of these spaces, I hope you'll be happy to have some thoughts from me around 6 tips from the training coalface, or my pet peeves, maybe. So the first one is to define your aims, okay? So if you're thinking about training in a newsroom, move from these broader goals, we want more stories, we want better stories, we want new formats, so we need to reach new audiences, etc., to think, first of all, what would good look like? What would it look like if we had achieved this? And then break that down into this, I think we've all heard this before, SMART, so something that is specific and achievable and measurable, realistic and timely. And that allows you then to map those aims to your target trainees. Okay, so you need to think, who needs to learn? What do they need to learn? And how can I make that content, the content that they need to take in, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and timely? How are they going to learn? Will they do it on the job? Is it better if they're in a classroom? Should they do it online or perhaps a webinar or a mixture? How much time have they got? And can you then be a bit realistic about what you can expect them to learn? Okay, so I have been asked truly to teach photography, podcasting, radio and video shooting and editing in a day. And that's actually not possible to learn. I can cover it, but you won't learn it. And then how are you going to measure that what was taught was actually learned? In other words, people have understood what you said. And then can they actually do? So beyond understanding, the ability to implement. And how are you going to help learners implement what they've learned? So are you going to provide mentoring? Are you going to add it to their key performance indicators and so on? So you've got some way of checking back. This will all allow you to, I'm just checking the time, yep, design training outcomes and measurement. So you would start that off with, this course is for these people, they will learn this thing, and this is defined in a particular way. We will then measure this using the specificity of what we've defined, and we'll use that to guide how we're going to measure the impact, and then we'll follow up in due course. On the left-hand side is a series of course outcomes that you'll probably be quite familiar with if you look up workshop on X, yeah? And it's very bland and it's not providing enough detail. On the right is a series of learning outcomes that are quite typical of university education. And you can see that that's very specific. It's quite small, don't worry about it. Just have a look at any journalism education curriculum on the internet and you'll see this kind of stuff, and it means that you can then measure against it quite well. Lastly, make it practical. So I'm lecturing at you. Ideally, I would have had time to give you a test afterwards. But you really want to move from speaking to being able to facilitate full implementation of skill sets. And that means that it has to be practical. People have to have time to practice. And that also means that you can identify their gaps because you can see where they're going wrong and need some help. And make sure that people's editors have bought into this process. Okay, so a lot of training is just offered. You go, you self-nominate, you attend, but you need enough time, you need chance to practice, you need commitment to mentored support and follow-up, and that means that your line manager or editor needs to be brought into that process. And I'd also just like to mention briefly, we have to do this in media development and media for development, that it has to be equal access, but this is often not the case in our newsrooms, and that at the bottom there is me with a group of 12 men, which was one of my training workshops in a country. So I just would like to make that recommendation. And allow enough time. So think about the sorts of formats, perhaps bite-sized learning, blended, modular, etc. Just think about, be a little bit creative about the ways that you're providing your journalists with opportunities to learn, and invite their participation in perhaps in the design. That's my part of the presentation. I'm going to hand over to Deborah. We're actually going to swap because we both use reading glasses. So one moment. Yes, I would love to. There we go.
Just while Corinne is setting up, I think probably one of the most important things is why do we bother about media development? Really and truly, what we want to do, a lot of the thought behind media development is to, this is what I was going to say, basically to increase capacity. We want to create, effectively, a journalist in every village, which is increasingly important in this day and age. Because I come from, I've been a journalist for many years before, and I received training as a journalist, but I was able to access that training. There's an awful lot of people who can't, who want to be journalists, who want to basically ensure that their voices are heard, but they don't have access to that training. So a lot of media development is seated in that principles. And that's basically what I'm talking about. Ensuring that the people we are able to send journalists into all corners of the globe and tell the stories of the people from all over the world, not just isolated stories from a Western perspective, but from everybody's perspective. So just a little bit about who I work for. I'm head of training at the Thomson Foundation. We've been around for more than 55 years. We've got over 200 consultants. We work in over 100 countries, not all at the same time, but we have worked in over 100 countries. And we basically run in-house training. We also run skills workshop and then long-term projects that are funded in various different ways. And what I'm going to talk specifically about this time is our sort of online digital initiative that we've started. And that's basically because when we started, we were looking at equipment, and this is equipment from a training centre that even I wasn't part of in the 1970s, where they were basically upskilling, teaching broadcast skills, and that was very much what we did then. Now we're looking at more complex projects, where the other pictures you see here is something called Regional Voices, which was based in Ukraine, which was looking at the treatment in regional media, helping to train regional journalists and look at the treatment of the stories of the displaced people when they'd come out of Crimea, when they'd come out of the eastern region of Donetsk, and how they were reflected in that local media. So the emphasis has changed quite a lot, as has the emphasis on how we also do our training. This was just 4 years ago, also in Ukraine. Mainly it was face-to-face workshops. Now you're more likely to perhaps see me through a mobile phone. So it changes a lot. And face-to-face training can be very effective. But as I say, what I want to talk about is now perhaps the sort of the online and the digital projects that we've been involved in. Because face-to-face training can be limited by access, geographical and political. It's very hard to get to places like Reunion Island, to Outer Mongolia, where there are journalists who would value and would gain from having new training in digital skills that would help them in their work. And politically, there may be issues about allowing journalist trainers to go into those countries. So there are limits to it. It can be expensive to send trainers in as well. And as I say, there's a reliance on funders to fund it. So the funders may not necessarily have the same interests in funding projects where there may be a need. And this is, I think, what led us particularly to look more about the e-learning project, is that the media landscape is now increasingly populated by individuals and influencers who are difficult to reach through face-to-face workshops, and who desperately want some kind of support, some kind of training. They want to understand how they protect themselves, how to protect their sources, and that's something that we have developed through some of our online training. This is a platform that we've set up. It's called Journalism Now, and it's aimed initially at individuals, and that's because that's where we perceived there to be a need for an online training. That has slightly changed over time, and I'll talk about why that's happened. But what we wanted to do was we wanted to replicate a little bit more of what we normally do in our workshops. So rather than me standing in front of you telling you this is what you should be doing, we tend to, in our workshops, have a very practical approach to it. It's all about creating content. It's all about an awareness of looking at the skills, discussions. And what we've tried to do is to replicate that within our online platform. So far, this is a fairly new project. It took about 2 years in the sort of putting together. We've got over 50 courses now on various things like mobile journalism, things like ethics. It's very difficult to persuade people to sit and listen to me talking about ethics in a workshop, but actually it's a very interesting area to get people involved in a sort of interactive way online, and it seems to have been quite a powerful way of teaching ethics. So we talk about ethics, we also talk about verification practices, all things that will be useful to people as individuals. So far we've got over 6,000 enrollments on some of the courses that we actually do, and I say that's in 13 months. We've had a bit of an explosion in the past couple of months, and I'll explain why shortly, but our numbers have increased. But the benefits just run quickly through the benefits of learning online. It can be completed at a time to suit you. It's very hard, if you're running a newsroom, to allow your journalists to come out for 2, 3, 4, 5 days, perhaps to do to do a face-to-face workshop. So what we've done is we've sort of combined that. You might be able to come up for a couple of days, and then you can learn around that environment. You can check what I say, so you can go back time after time and reinforce and relearn and check. Did she really say that? Oh, no, I don't think she really did. Well, yes, actually, I really did say that. So you've got that sort of library of content that you can always refer to. And it's more effective, particularly if you've been born in a digital age, which I've had to be pulled into. You're used to learning in that sort of environment. So it is more digitally focused. And it's a lifelong experience that you can keep going on. And we've also created a community as part of it. So we've persuaded some people to leave their Facebook groups and leave their WhatsApp groups and actually to be involved in the community that is part of our learning platform. In terms of the benefits for media development, it increases media capacity, it achieves scale. So rather than 30 in the room, I could perhaps be talking to 100,000. It needs funding, but it's not necessarily limited by the funder's interests, and it can be accessed globally. And I know everyone's going to say, well, connectivity perhaps in Reunion Island is not as good as it could be, but there are ways, basically it's saved to the platform, and then if connectivity is not particularly good at that particular time, you can return to it. And we don't use a lot of video. And because of the problems with broadband and downloading in certain places, we've found that we've avoided using a lot of video. So a lot of it is illustration, a lot of it is quizzes, a lot of it is interaction, and then we do mentoring coming backwards and forwards. But the video was causing problems in certain parts of Africa. It will get better, but it did cause problems. And we are reaching individuals in a way that perhaps we weren't reaching before. However, how many of you here have done MOOCs? How many of you have completed them? Truly, how many of you have completed them? Okay. Well, only 5% of people actually complete the free online courses. So that is a problem with online learning. We found, we've actually had quite a good completion rate. We've had a 28%, but I think partly we've had that because we've incorporated mentoring as well as it. So you can come back with some forwards, you can send questions in, and that works well. So instead, what we've done is we've tried to then incorporate a sort of blended learning system. And I know my time's getting on, so I want to give you a few examples as to how it works, which is a combination of online and face-to-face learning. So you bring the digital learning tools into the workshop environment. And we found that has a lot of very effective outcomes. The Regional Voices project in Ukraine that I was talking about, at the end of that, we introduced an online course specifically designed, written in Ukrainian, which there are very few online courses, as you can imagine, in Ukrainian, specific with content relevant, and as journalists, we always talk about making your content relevant. So the content was very relevant. As you can see here, it drew on the engaging your audience. It drew on the arrival of the displaced people into places like Kharkiv when they first arrived and how they were dealt with, and also incorporated Ukrainian experts as well as British experts. So it was far more relevant for them in terms of learning. Our multimedia summer course works in a similar way. We do an online part of it at the beginning. We then ensure that the work that is set online in the same way as you would do in a university. And then we also keep a library of the courses. So if the verification specialist, they keep their material online, and then it's a reference to everybody that's been on that course, and they can return and come back to. And one of the interesting effects that we've discovered since doing that is the sort of trickle-down skills impact that it has. This is Rania, who was on our course last year. She has been very active in the uprising in Sudan, the recent uprising in Sudan, in passing on the skills that she learnt at that course, and particularly in terms of mobile journalism, training women journalists in order to film what was going on and to get the messages out, which, because of the restrictions on platforms, very little was coming out. And she was able to train people. We couldn't go in and train them. She was able to train them. And the same was true of our mobile journalism. Gisela is from Ecuador. She has started her own training in terms of students within Ecuador. So it's a sort of moving on. I'll finish on the journalism now, where we've gone from now. We've just launched something called the Team Challenge in the past 2 months. We've got 650 participants on that one. 100 groups are taking part on a 2-month intensive course that we're taking place. And the interesting thing about that is we've linked people in places like Lesotho, Cuba, China into groups, and they're working together. We've also got people in places that you'd never reach. At the moment, we've got people working on it in Yemen. We couldn't go in and train in Yemen. We're giving them support, and that's my Reunion Island. Jean-Paul in Reunion Island is on his own, taking part in it. I think he's joined up with someone in Indonesia, and I think he's got a better view than we've got here in Perugia anyway. So that's a very, very brief trot through the sort of work we're doing. Okay. Do you want me to?
Thank you.
Do you want to change that?
While my presentation is being prepared, I bet that you are wondering who BBC Media Action is. So I'll tell you who we are not. We are not BBC News, we are not the BBC World Service, and we are not the BBC Academy. We are the BBC's international development charity. We are a registered charity in the UK, and we have been founded in 1999. And I'm going to be very adventurous and try to play a short video that hopefully will explain what we do.
Communication.
And here is where we work. We work in the Global South, in fragile, poor countries emerging from conflict and countries prone to natural disasters, floods in Bangladesh, earthquakes in Nepal. We serve, as the film says, some of the most vulnerable audiences in the world, marginalized communities like the rural poor, women, children, young people. And we do that by producing programs in local languages with local production teams, and we work with local media partners. And we work with them to strengthen their capacity. Our overarching goal when we do capacity strengthening is to get and support our media partners to reflect in their outputs a wide range of development objectives, things like transparency, accountability, increased social cohesion, gender, health topics. We also want them to give a voice to underserved communities, again, girls and women, youth, rural poor. And we support them to adopt and stand by strong sets of editorial values and guidelines that form the foundation of their work. We have changed our approach to capacity strengthening over time, and we have now moved away from training and one-off workshops because there is not enough evidence that they have any long-lasting impact. And we have now adopted an embedded mentoring approach where mentors spend lengthy amounts of time with each media partner. For instance, in a recent project in Sierra Leone, our mentors spent up to 6 months embedded with their assigned media organization to help them produce programs that tackled local governance stories. In Zambia, we have a slightly different approach. Our mentors visit regularly our media partners, and they spend up to 2 weeks with each of them and help them produce programs for young audiences on the topic of sexual and reproductive health. As you can imagine, it's a tough job. And it can be dangerous in countries like Afghanistan and South Sudan. But it works. Embedded mentoring, we have evidence that it is sustainable. And it is sustainable because it is developed and maintained over time. Our projects last between 6 months and up to 5 years. I think this was the longest we have ever done. The longer, the better. Embedded mentoring is bespoke to each media partner. It answers to immediate needs of a partner. And critically, the mentors are local journalists who speak the local language or languages in some countries, who understand the local media environment, who understand the local social norms, culture, and tradition, so they have a very good feeling of what's appropriate and what's not, of what might work in a local context or not. And the mentors get to spend long amounts of time with their mentees in the work environment of their mentees. So they get not only to know their mentees very well, but also the media organization. And they have plenty opportunity to adapt their mentoring programs to reflect the evolving needs of both individuals and the media organization. We train and we support the mentors, but they do the work. In order to be able to offer bespoke mentoring, we always start with a needs assessment of each potential media partner. And that's our process of deciding who are the appropriate partners for us. It's a very thorough selection process. The needs assessment become our baseline against which we can set realistic objectives for the mentoring program, against which we can monitor progress, and against which, in the end, we can measure whether or not the intervention had any impact. And when we assess the needs of our partners, we look at things, the obvious ones, the program outputs, the level of skills and knowledge of their staff, but we also look at things like management structures, HR processes, if any. And that's the time when we can identify any potential barriers. And the potential barriers tend to be the same everywhere. And they are usually political and business affiliation of the organization through the ownership. And that usually can lead to censorship or self-censorship. Corruption. Lack of interest at the senior management level in training staff. High turnover of staff, which is reflective of poor management. And once we identify the barriers, we can decide whether we can work around them or that that particular media organization is not going to be a viable partner. And we stop it then and there. The other thing that we have learned over time is that mentoring to just strengthen the skills, the craft skills of individual journalists and program makers is not enough. The sustainable model that has been working for us, and we have evidence for that, is when we co-produce with our partners. So when we work with them to produce new programs or to change and adapt some of their existing outputs. And that model is sustainable because the media organization gets a feeling of ownership over the new product. So they are much more likely to continue to produce it after the end of our project. And also because we design these co-productions with the media partners, we know their resources, we know their financial resources and their skills and knowledge, so that we always design something that we know that they can continue to produce. One example, in Nepal in 2007, we introduced an audience-led debate called Saja Sawal that mirrors a flagship BBC program called Question Time, where a live audience is asking questions of a panel formed of elected officials and other public figures. At the time in Nepal, it was for the very first time when ordinary members of the public, and for the very first program in the audience were farmers and women and members of the Dalit community, so people who had never ever before had an opportunity to ask questions directly to an elected official. And we have been producing this program until last year when the project finally ended, and now the Nepali audience knows that they have a right to ask questions. They have a right to expect answers when they ask these questions. And Saja Sawal is a program that we produce ourselves as BBC Media Action with a local team. But we wanted our network of local radio partners who operate in very remote communities in mountainous regions of Nepal to design their own versions of Saja Sawal. So our mentors worked with these radio stations and helped them design something that worked for them. And these programs continue to be produced and broadcast. Audiences matter. This is the overarching editorial principle at the BBC and BBC Media Action. However, we know that many of the media organizations that we work with don't really know who their audiences are. So a very important part of our mentoring programs is to support them to listen to and understand their audiences. who they are, what they need, what they are interested in, what devices they have access to, how they consume media, what time of the day they consume media. We also support them to better reflect their audiences in their own outputs. For instance, give more airtime to women or young people or specific communities. And we also support them to engage with and co-create, if you like, with their audiences, either through more interactive programming or simply through opening channels of communication via social media or text messages where they can receive feedback but also can source ideas, stories, and so on. Over time, this leads to better informed audiences, and better informed audiences are going to demand more from their media providers, as the Nepal example. But that's not enough. We know that media practitioners do not operate in a vacuum. Their work environment can enable, but can constrain them. So for us, craft skills is not an end in itself. Helping people make better programs is not an end in itself, because we know that when program makers have new skills and knowledge, if they don't go back to an enabling work environment, and if they don't have support from their management and their organization, they're never going to have an opportunity to use these new skills and knowledge. So in our experience, the single strongest predictor of whether or not a capacity strengthening intervention is going to be sustainable is the management and the organization buy-in. And that's why we have come to this integrated approach to capacity strengthening, where, yes, the foundation will always be the craft skills, but we also offer management skills, finance skills, audience research skills, editorial skills, which are absolutely critical, management, and so on. So it's the full package. And finally, and very briefly, we are a charity. We are funded by donors, and donors want to know that their money has impact. So everything we do has to be rooted in evidence. We start with formative research that becomes the baseline against which we evaluate the impact at the end of the project, but with capacity strengthening interventions, research is present throughout. Needs assessments. When we produce a new program, we always test and pilot it in focus groups. We constantly monitor the individual mentees as well as the organization for evidence of progress as a result of mentoring. And whenever we have the means, we also do media landscape research, because it's so important to understand the wider environment in which a partner operates. And this is not work that we do much, but we would like to do more of in the future, because again, it's important to recognize that the media organizations themselves do not operate in a vacuum. The regulatory and legislative framework in their countries can be enabling or constraining. So work with governments to around these frameworks is increasingly important. And I think I'm running over my 10 minutes, so I'll just stop here. Sorry.
Okay. Hello to everyone. My name is Slobodan Georgiev. I'm coming from Belgrade, Serbia, not Syria, not Siberia. I work for Balkan Investigative Reporting Network. How many of you ever heard about our organization? BIRN, Balkan Investigative Reporting Network. How many? Mm-hmm. Do you know about our outlet, balkaninsight.com? Mm-hmm. You don't know. Okay. My colleagues actually told you everything about media trainings. So we people from Balkans, actually, we learned from BBC and from Thomson Reuters Foundation, you know. So the principles that were established in that kind of journalism actually are the principles we are adopting, and those are the principles. Huh? It's too loud. Huh? Okay, sorry. And these principles are actually something that we want to implement in our region. When I say our region, I will explain you that somebody calls it Western Balkans, somebody calls it Southeast Europe. It's actually a region of 6 countries that are not part of EU. So it's Macedonia now, Northern Macedonia. It's Serbia, it's Kosovo, it's Montenegro, Bosnia, and Albania. These countries are at the gate of EU, so we're going to see in next 10 or 15 years who's going to be a new member. But in that period, we are trying as an organization who are actually operates in all these countries to actually fight and advocate for professional journalism. The story about Birn began in 2005, 2004, 2005 when several brave women, reporters who actually worked all along the region, and they reported during the wars in former Yugoslavia. They decided actually to form a network of reporters. They had, I think, very good vision, and they established the whole network on very good and very healthy grounds. So now, almost 15 years afterwards, we are a very huge organization for our region. We operate in all these countries. We have correspondents from Moldova, from Romania, Bulgaria, from Greece, from Turkey, and all these stories you can read in English on balkaninsight.com. It's a very good source for all the people in the globe from the Balkans. I think it's the best source from the Western Balkans for all of you. In Serbia, we are operating as a local media organization. We are registered as a NGO actually, and we publish our stories on our website. Most of the stories are investigative stories, and I think that together with our friends from other local organizations like CRIC, now we have our friend here from CRIC, Dragan is here, which is part of OCCRP, and guys from Center for Investigative Journalism. Actually, we became in the last couple of years in Serbia, I think, front runners when we talk about journalism, really. Why this has happened? Because I don't know how much of you knows about the media situation in the region and in Serbia especially, but we have really we have huge problems in terms of how media scene is organized and how it operates, because we don't have proper media market, and the government led by Progressive Party actually is somebody who is controlling the market, media market, and through media market and through the public money which is given for the public for the content, they are actually controlling mainstream media. So you can separate the whole media ecosystem in Serbia in two areas. You have this, let's call it media establishment, papers and TV stations, and you have this media alternative in which Birn has its, I think, very good place. So as a network, we try to, and this is what I wanted to tell you here as a model for development, or model for connecting different media organization in one single area. We actually, we were not just satisfied to publish the stories about corruption in Serbia. We wanted to share our knowledge in terms of journalism among the journalists all along the Serbia. So we actually established one, I will not call it network, because I think now in nowadays it's a better word is community. It's actually community of journalists and community of online platforms all along the country, in which we are trying actually to implement all these things we actually heard from our colleagues from Reuters and BBC. So in the situation when where the mainstream media are totally under control of government, and agencies, marketing, media buying agencies that are close to government, it happened something strange. I think that we flourished. There is so many good initiatives in terms of investigative journalism, analytical journalism in Serbia, online, not on the TV and in print, But I think it's a very good seed for next generation of journalists in this country and all along the region. So what we've done, we called our friends from different cities and towns in Serbia who are the owners of the local web portals to join this community. We tried together because we have very good cooperation with different donors in Serbia and in Europe. So we provide them with some financial assistance, and all along also with assistance in terms of training, in terms of training for the journalists, in terms of editorial trainings, in terms of trainings for digital marketing, everything in order to form this, as I said, new media alternative, and also to try to challenge the market, because we understood if we act as a community, as one big platform that is consists of several media outlets, that we can maybe attract some money on the market. So now it's one of the biggest challenges in Serbia, just to check, because they say you're too small, you cannot be a part of this huge cake on the media market. Now we say, okay, fine, maybe I'm a small, but if we have 10 media around, maybe we are able to participate in this game. So I didn't have 10 minutes, but I hope that you're going to have questions for me. What do you say? Okay, fine. Okay, for this first round, I think it's enough. So I do hope that you have some questions for us. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much to my panelists. Is there a microphone, or is this one? Can I borrow it for a second? Yep. Oh, got it. There we go. Hi. What I'd like to do, rather than doing a chaired discussion, I feel one of the reasons why I wanted to convene this panel is to give journalists an opportunity to ask people in the media development and media for development sectors to ask questions. And so I really want to throw this straight to you as the audience, to ask anything you would like of Slobodan or Anka or of Deborah that you might want to implement in your own country, or you want to get involved in media development or media for development. So I would really, really be interested to hear what you would like to ask. I have some questions, but I'm very keen to hear what you would like to query. We have a question at the front and one over there.
Hi, my name is Mia Malan. I'm from South Africa. I wonder, my question is about funding. So you mentioned funding as a challenge, and over the past decade, there's been quite an increase in donor-funded journalism as opposed to donor-funded training. Lots of the pots of money are now going directly to media houses. And I wonder, has that had an impact on your ability to train, or has that an impact on less funding for the media development world? Or have you, have they just given more money to media houses and kept your funding at the same level, or has it impacted on your level of funding?
We sometimes get some of the funding to do the training within the media organisations. So it's a slightly difficult model in that respect. I don't necessarily think it's had a big impact. It is just difficult to get funding for some projects, I think, and there is funding there, but it tends to be sometimes directed in certain areas and then move from that area to another area. And media development doesn't necessarily benefit a great deal from some of the funding. It sometimes seems to be seen to be a bit of an add-on in terms of media, like in any kind of media training, in terms of the big funded projects which aren't specifically about media, but we would be involved in on the side. It's you're added in afterwards. So. Yeah, I'm not sure that helps, but the mixed funding model is difficult to find. Anka, have you?
I don't know, maybe I can add, because we are coming from the organization, or I'm coming from the organization which is very dependent on donations, you know. So if we do not have possibility to apply for the donations, you know, probably we will not be able to sustain, you know. For our region, it's necessary, because all the money on the market is totally controlled, you know. You cannot apply for that, or you can just pick up some, you know, something little from the market. So donations are very, very important for us in the Balkans. I don't know for any other region.
Hi, my name is Thomson, and I work for Internews, which is also a media development organization. And our job as yours is to build the capacity of local media, often in the most difficult context you can imagine. And I just wanted to reflect on, you've mentioned different way of learning, online, face-to-face, having the mentor in the media organization. And I just want to reflect on the online learning, and I feel that we are going all into that direction, and online learning can be very new, and it's very new for us in Europe, with all the resource we have, and being able to connect easily. And my experience, I've never finished a course, for example, online. I've enrolled in many, but never really completed it. And it's even more difficult to work with people remotely that are not used to work online or to use the internet for skills or to grow. And my experience with Internews was doing the first face-to-face training was really like building the relationship between the mentor trainers and the journalists. And if that connection doesn't happen, it's difficult after for the journalists to follow up and to use the tools or the resource you provide them online. So just was reflecting online, are we not pushing too much online? Is it the way people are used to learn or not? And how can we make also the more face-to-face that should not replace the connection that journalists can make with us and with their mentor trainer?
I think that's why I think it's important. The blended model is the way forward, because I think that can then give far more impact from the face-to-face, because you can take some of the work that can be done online out of that workshop environment. So it's a blended model is much more effective. So you can do some online learning initially ahead of a workshop, then you can do the face-to-face, and then you can do the follow-up mentoring, which often we can't necessarily do face-to-face. And I think in terms of learning, that's incredibly important. It's, you know, you can't walk away, but you're enabled to do that more online mentoring following a workshop or something. So it's a continuation. But I agree with you. I think the face-to-face learning is incredibly important, and you can do a lot, and the impact can be great. But so I think it has to be a mixed model, and I think we should not say, right, everything's going to go online, which there is a danger. And when it's a new toy sometimes, it's not that new, but it could be a new toy. So people say, oh, let's put everything online, it's cheaper. It's actually not cheaper. It's quite complicated to do good onlining. To do it, to put it together in a structured form. So it's not necessarily cheaper. So I would definitely go for the sort of blended approach.
May I add something as a journalist, because I'm not, you know. Okay, fine. Just to say, for the colleagues, for the younger colleagues, that you have to go to see the people, to talk to the people, to be on the streets. That's the most important thing. You know, you cannot learn journalism from the bedroom. It's not possible. You know, no bedroom journalism. No filing requests. Go on the street.
Can I very quickly add that we use the mentoring model with online learning as well. We provide a real person in real time to work with everyone on an online course, and no, that's just another way of doing it. But blended training or blended learning is the key model.
If I may, just briefly, and I know we're like less than a minute, we have a very interesting group of people in this room because we have Byrne, we have BBC Media Action, we have Thomson Foundation, we have William Church here from Thomson Reuters Foundation, we have Internews, and this is a very, for me, I think this is a very exciting moment because we have all the big players in this room at the moment working in this space in media development. So while I have the stage, I would say if we would like to continue the conversation perhaps at Brafani later, I certainly would welcome that. I'd very much like to thank Deborah Kelly and Anka Toda and Slobodan Georgiev. There you go. And also to all of you for your time and attention during this panel. Thank you so much.